Hi. So, for those of you who don't know my name's Juliana. Um, and I just wanted to talk to you today about, I guess I wanted to share with you a bit of my own journey with creating boundaries and how I've navigated that as an empath and a highly sensitive person my in my in my life. So I'll start kind of from the beginning. At the age of 2.5, my little brother Adrian was born, and he was born at 28 weeks. So he was very premature, and this was in the 80s. So it was they definitely didn't have the same level of care as they do now. And so obviously it was a very stressful time for my family. I don't remember much of it. I can put pieces together of how I may have been feeling as a 2.5-year-old little girl, based on photographs of myself. But my very first memory is actually during this time, and it was eating yogurt out of a little container, and you know, the pre-stirred yogurt kind where the yogurt's like purple or pink or whatever the fruit is. I was eating pre-stirred purple yogurt in the hospital cafeteria. It's about all I know. But what that does tell me is that that time was quite significant for me, if that was my first memory. My mom tells me this story of once Adrian came home from the hospital that he would be crying. I think they kept him in my room at first when he came home, and he would start crying in the middle of the night, and I would march into my parents' room and demand that they go and get Adrian because he was crying. So already that tells me something, right? Like that's like, huh. I was already very aware and quite like, I'm gonna caretake everyone. So I don't remember like specifics around being empathic or highly sensitive, but what I do know about being an empathic and highly sensitive person, and I put that on my childhood, I know that I love to play with fairies in the garden, back garden. They existed there for me. I loved my dolls. I loved to be quiet. My brothers were very rambunctious. I liked to be quiet. I really liked dance, ballet, jazz, and tap dancing. I didn't like big crowds. I hated speaking in front of the class. I would go bright red, and then I would go even more red because I was embarrassed. I was also really sensitive to the feelings in the house, and I had a really hard time communicating how I was feeling. I remember my throat would kind of close up, and I would get this like clenching in my heart, and I wouldn't be able to communicate. And I would often do this with my hands out of frustration for not being able to speak what was going on inside of me. In grade 4, my mom got really sick. She was in the hospital for, I don't know how long off the top of my head, but it felt like a very long time for me in grade 4. At this time, I remember I quit ballet, dance, all of those things, and I joined soccer and baseball. Don't know why I did that. My mom says she wonders if I did that to help my dad out. And as soon as she said that to me a little while ago, I was like, oh, it made so much sense in my body. I was like, oh yeah, totally, right? I was trying to make it easier on my family, right? I wasn't being a child where I was very aware of what was going on. So my mom was in the hospital. This was the 90s. They had no idea what was going on for her. It turns out it was celiac. Once they discovered that, she's super healthy now and fine. But I learned very quickly during that time to start caretaking. So that's I think when I started learning to cook, cooking brown rice for my mom, making pasta meals for family while they were out with soccer and baseball. So things kind of went along as this. I was kind of like looking, feeling for my family. At around the age of 11, 12, something snapped for me in my brain. I became incredibly rebellious. I started smoking weed, smoking cigarettes, drinking, doing acid, doing magic mushrooms. And this continued throughout high school. I started skipping school. I dropped out of French immersion. I attempted suicide. There was lots of stuff going on. And I never really understood it. I remember thinking at that time, I don't understand why I'm suicidal. I don't understand why this is all going on for me. I was aware of that even at that time, that something didn't make sense to me. And then this kind of continued throughout high school and then into my early 20s. I was what I now call numbing myself. I was self-medicating. I had so much anxiety and so much depression. The best way for me to do this was through drugs and alcohol. And on reflecting on that now, it's because I was feeling so much and I had no outlet for it. There was nowhere for all of those feelings to go. They were whirling around inside of me. I was picking up on everything in my family. I was picking up on everything in school. It was just too much for me. And so I turned to numbing substances. And it wasn't fun, right? Like, some people think they hear my stories, they're like, oh, that sounds like such a fun time in your 20s partying. It wasn't fun. There was always this underlying, like, there's something wrong with me. I'm anxious all the time. No one really likes me. Why am I feeling those feelings? Why am I feeling those feelings? It was happening all the time. And the only way I could cope was through using weed and alcohol mostly. I went to Europe at this time and I wound up picking grapes in France, and which was one of the most magical times of my life. And I was reminded of how much I liked moving my body, using my body, and being in connection with the earth. I also had a stint of doing this when I was 17. And it was very healing for me at that time. Unfortunately, it only lasted a couple of months and then I kind of forgot about it. So in France, I was reminded of this and I got this like intuitive, hey, you need to go back to Canada and you need to go work in the woods. And so I went to school for forestry. And while I was still self-medicating, I was reconnecting to something that I had lost, that I remember feeling when I was a little girl playing with fairies in the garden. Something about being in the forest, something about being with the trees, something about the air, the way the light hit the leaves, like my soul felt at home for the first time in a very, very long time. So I went into forestry, quickly found out that a lot of what I was doing was very, it wasn't in alignment. I just wanted to hug trees and play in the forest. But I kept doing these jobs because I thought that that's what I should do. I thought that I should do all of these things. Meanwhile, I'm having relationships that aren't that great. I'm saying yes to things that I don't want to say yes to. I would have friendships and I would just keep saying yes, 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 because I knew that that's what that other person wanted. And I was not counting myself into the equation at all. And then I would get super frustrated and I would leave the relationship. I would leave the friendship. And then once I'd found myself again, I would be like, fuck, what did I do? I just left that relationship and I don't know why. I also did this in romantic relationships. I would say yes, 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 yes to my partner. And then I would get extremely resentful. I would get angry. I would feel misunderstood. And it was all just because I didn't know what I was supposed to do. I was so picking up on the feelings of everyone else. So back to the forest bit, I would be in the forest and I started like reconnecting to myself through being in the forest, through that peace and quiet, through the connection with the trees. So fast forward a little bit, I eventually got laid off and I discovered yoga. First it was, what's it called? Iyengar. And then it was Bikram hot yoga. And then I found Ashtanga. And up until the point where I found Ashtanga, the yoga really reconnected me to my body, and the anxiety running through my mind diminished because it was so focused on like, can I stay in the hot room? Can I do this? Can I keep moving, right? Can I just stay here and not let my mind run away with itself? So then I found Ashtanga yoga, and while the asanas of the yoga were incredible, what happened for me was I started my two teachers, Jeff and Harmony, they started teaching me about pranayama and breathing and meditation. And for the first time in my life, my mind kind of really slowed down. I started finding spaces. Right? It's just spaces in my life where I could breathe for a second, where my mind wasn't spinning all the time. And it was incredibly beneficial for me. Like it changed my life. And at the same time, I was still hyper aware of everyone else. I didn't know this, of course, hyper aware of everyone else, and feeling like I didn't belong, feeling like I was too much, feeling like I had too many feelings, and then saying yes to people when I didn't even really mean it. So fast forward again, and I'm still kind of self-medicating through all of this time. And I had one of my like fourth or fifth business ventures where I just agreed to go into business with someone because it must be what I should do, because I could feel how much that other person wanted me to work with them, and it didn't work out for like the third, fourth, fifth time. And I melted down. I broke down. I got extremely drunk, so much that my brother, the premature one, Adrian, I was talking about, had to come and pick me up downtown Victoria and bring me home. I think my mom came over that night because I was so bad. And then I woke up the next morning and it was like a light went off. And I was like, I need to go back to school. I wanted to be a counselor when I was a teenager. So I found the school that I ended up going to and graduating from, and that all happened within a year. But what happened during this time when I was at school, someone brought up in my first year around needs and values. And I was like, what the fuck are those? What are my needs and what are my values? I have no idea. None. I had none. I was like, it was a totally new subject for me. The fact that I had any specific needs. And this started my journey on boundaries. I was like, holy crap, I'm allowed to ask for what I want. I'm allowed to express what's important to me. I'm allowed to, like agree and not agree with my friends. I'm allowed to thus have boundaries. I'm allowed to ask for what I need. I'm allowed to express that to my loved ones. Holy crap, this was a whole new ball game for me. So what I started doing was I started slowly. I started noticing when my default was always yes. I was a yes man. Everything I said was yes. And I would say it before I would even think about it. It was like, oh, I'm just walking with someone down the street and they're telling me about something and they like, what do you think? I'm like, yeah. I would agree with everyone. So my first step was beginning to just notice this pattern of saying yes and agreeing all the time. And it slowly started to change. I would notice it, like a week later, I would be reflecting on something and be like, holy crap, I just did it there. And then it would be like a day, and then it would be an hour, and then it would be a minute, and then it would be a second, and then I would be able to catch it. And I would actually be able to express my perspective on something or my beliefs. So this took some time, right? And then I started thinking, okay, what's important to me? What are the things that are important in my life? How can I actually be in relationship while feeling everything that's going on for someone, and then also being able to have my own feelings and bring them forward into the relationship? And it was a process. So I tell you this story because when we want to make changes in our lives, they take time. Not often as much time as it's taken for us to get where we are today when we start to make changes. But beginning to noticing things like what your needs are, what your values are, what your body is saying to you, and then what your boundaries are, and then learning to communicate them is a practice, right? It's this practice that you get to cultivate into your own. It's an act of self-love when we start to self-reflect on what our needs are, what is important to us, what our values are, and then through that making boundaries. One of the things that I think is super important is that boundaries aren't about keeping people out. Boundaries are about loving yourself and teaching your loved ones how to love you. Without boundaries, they will never know what's important to you. They will never, ever, ever know or get what, how to love you, right? Like that rest is super important to you, for example, or that you love to play in the forest, or reading every night before bed is really important, or that you love to cook certain foods. They won't know that. And thus, I don't know about you, but when I spent my life with not telling people what my needs, values, or boundaries were, I got really resentful. It's not fun, right? Because we're never actually giving that other person the opportunity to know us. So as sensitive people, this is tough because we're picking up on everything around us. And those boundaries, when we get really clear on what is important to us, those boundaries help us delineate what's ours and what's others. We're not going to do it perfect. I still don't do it perfect. When you start creating boundaries, it's uncomfortable. I promise you, it is uncomfortable when you start creating boundaries. For me, when I'm creating boundaries, it feels easier most of the time now. And when I create boundaries with people who matter to me, it feels uncomfortable. I feel it kind of in my solar plexus and in my stomach. It feels hard. It's like I don't want them to think I don't love them, right? That's the brain, or that's the story my brain tells me. So just know that it feels uncomfortable. It will. It's designed to, right? Creating boundaries feels tricky. So I just want to leave you with that, just to reflect on and think of needs and values and boundaries and what they may be for you, as well as just to remember that, we're all kind of working through this. It's a human work, this work. It's courageous work starting to put boundaries into place, and it's a practice. So I'll leave you with these 4 things, as you begin to create boundaries. You need to know what your needs are. You need to know what your values are. You need to know how your body reacts to yes and no's. And you need to know, from those 3 things, you need to create your boundaries. And then you need to learn how to communicate your boundaries. So 5 things, I guess. So I have a free mini course, a boundary mini course. It's delivered over about 2 weeks. So you have time to reflect and journal and move through the move through the process. So if you want to sign up for it, just hit the link and send me an email if you have any thoughts. Like, I'm super curious. I just want to know what this video is like for you and what it made you think about. And yeah, so wishing you all the best, and we'll talk to you soon.